Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Happy Sunday to you. Welcome to our another episode of our Therapist Directory Live. I am your host, Dayla Burgess. I am the founder of TeleConnect Counseling Practice and also the founder of this space, Therapist Directory Live BDA. So before I bring on our guest, I'd like to share a bit of a story with you. Who doesn't like story time? So I think this is important because before we even became a counseling practice, long before I even thought that we would be a business, the first service that we actually provided to the public, why I even founded TeleConnect, is because we wanted to create a conduit for folks to have access to culturally sensitive, accessible mental health information. We wanted to remove the stigma and kind of the shame around talking about these discussions in our community. So I said, let's create a therapist directory. So we've curated a very small community of local professionals who are out there doing the work, who are certified and specialize in these areas. And so no matter how much business we actually go into or whatever pillars of business we actually create, Therapist Directory Live is something that was created for accessibility and representation for the healers in our community. And that's what this space will always represent. That's what I pray it always represents. So I would like to introduce our illustrious guest. We have a thanatologist for the first time, and I'm going to read her bio before I bring her on. Let me just pull up what she sent me. Okay, so Jeelise Allen is Bermuda's only thanatologist, specializing in death, dying, grief, and bereavement. Founder of Tuwile Grief Support. I hope I said her gorgeous practice name right, because it's such a beautiful name and I mess things up easily. But she is the founder of Tuwile Grief Support, a counseling service that offers personalized care for adults experiencing loss through one-on-one and group therapy, workshops, and education. Jeelise trained in Canada and the UK, served as a bereavement service volunteer with St. Christopher's Hospice, where the hospice movement began, and managed the bereavement service program during her employment with Friends of Hospice. She is also currently a counselor at Mayvara and the Women's Resource Center, and a member of Final Steps Bermuda. She is dedicated to providing collaborative, ethical, and client-centered support. So I bring to you Miss Jeelise Allen. Get on here, Jeelise girl. Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Sunday.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Dayla.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I'm gonna just pull up some of the questions that I want to ask you. And towards the end also, guys, I know I posted something on our Instagram about asking, inviting the community to ask these questions. So we're gonna hold those questions off to the end. But before we get started, I like to ask folks, Jeelise, who do come onto our Therapist Directory Live, what their North Star is, what's the reason for getting started, especially your specific area of expertise with death, grief, and dying. This is such a place where we become very avoidant and tense as humans around this specific topic. So what led you to this specific space of healing?
So it's not that much of a glamorous story or anything, but when I initially went to university at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario, Canada, I didn't know exactly what my path was going to be, but I always thought maybe actuarial science, law, politics. And so I took an array of classes and I was like, you know what, I'm not really feeling this. And so I took a chance and took a class in palliative care, and I really fell in love. It answered a lot of questions for me, especially around my own losses and losses that didn't have to do with death specifically, which is, I think, important to mention because most people think that grief only goes with death, and that's not the case. You can lose anything. Anything can be a loss if you deem it valuable. And so for me, it just answered so many questions. And I came home and, I started to volunteer at the adult daycare center with Friends of Hospice. And I was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And I mean, at that time, actuarial science wasn't something that was a big thing, or that I knew many people and people that look like me were actually into it. So I'm always chasing something a little bit outside of the box. So
Yeah.
this, kind of fit the bill too. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, which area I might land in, because it's broad, right? In
It
terms of
is.
death, dying, grief, and bereavement. I have a very keen interest in looking at like natural burials and maybe possibly taking my business into that direction. Or could I do the product side of it and sell certain things that go around with death and dying and grief? And, what's the perfect gift to give somebody who is grieving? Or,
Mm,
or do I want to do the maybe I wanted to go into the police and become a family liaison, or work with
yeah.
this, or funeral, or be an embalmer, or be at the morgue. Like there's so many different ways you could take this
So many avenues. Yeah.
research. But for me, it's very rewarding to work with people. And I just believe that I'm not in this world by myself. And so we kind of need to help each other. And so
That's
it
right.
comes natural, it comes easy to me. I always feel at peace. And I feel like I'm definitely living out my purpose every time I sit with somebody and they either understand it or they feel seen and heard with, me normalizing the grief process to them. And so I
Yeah.
just feel like, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do. Didn't think I was going to have my own practice and all of that. So I'm just following, the ancestors, God, whoever
That's
you
right.
believe in. But I
Yeah.
definitely feel like this is my purpose, and I'm excited to see where it's going to take me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I totally agree with you. The human experience of death and bereavement touches so many areas of our community and our lives. And it's like you said, you can literally be in any walk of life, any form of work, and this specific type of human experience will find its way there. No one is exempt from this.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure you are, God bless to the actuarial scientists, but I'm sure you are so happy that you chose this path and this journey, because it's definitely a special work. So like you said, there are so many parts of our community that are impacted by grief and loss, and it's very important for folks to know that loss by death is only one way that you can experience loss, right? And through the amazing work that we do in counseling, even if someone isn't presenting with, a death experience as their main reason of coming in, they have been touched by grief or loss in some way, and guaranteed it'll find its way into our sessions, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what's something, Jeelise, that because so many of us are going through, someone knows someone in this community who has experienced, been touched by grief and loss, right? What's something that you believe it's important for this large group of people in our collective who may be grieving right now to know during their grieving that isn't said enough? And I know that's a big question, but
Yeah.
what's something they need to know?
I think it's important for everyone to understand that although that grief is a natural part of our life, right? Death is going to reach us. That's the only guarantee we actually have in this world. I may never have the amount of children I desire. I may never get that dream job, or move to this place, or see these countries, or do all
Mm,
the things I aspire to do, but I'm definitely going to die. And that's important. That's definitely something that we are all going to experience. And so grief is a part of that
yeah,
loss. And so what I don't think people understand most is that even though it's natural, it's something we're all going to experience, you also can get support around it. So you don't have to struggle with it. You don't have to just, you know, go on with their fish, soldier through basically
yes,
the most
yeah,
difficult parts of it. And so it's important that you reach out and get the support that you need, and understand that other people can help you, which is why I love support groups, because they're so powerful. It's such a powerful connection in being able to hear other people's stories and connect
yes,
with them, and understand the differences that what you're experiencing, and how to help each other. because support is really very pivotal in being able to help you through your grief journey. So yeah, so that would be my thing, is so that people don't, just because it's natural, you do can get support. You don't
That's
have to
right.
go through it and just soldier on. If it's difficult, if you're not handling it very well, then come and seek support.
Yeah. You never learn, guys. You never learn. And I know that pain and a really tough experience, suffering through grief and loss, you will convince yourself that you may be alone in it or that you need to isolate to feel better. But connection is the first step to how we actually begin to feel like ourselves again. So thank you, Jeelise. That's beautifully said. As you said, death is a part of our human experience. No, none of us will go unscathed in this journey, in this lifetime. And in your experience, when you're working with folks, what is the hardest part for people to accept about this truism, this idea that we will all be touched by it, but it doesn't make it harder. It doesn't make it easier to accept, right? So what, in your experience, how do we begin acceptance in order to work through it?
So for most people, I think when you're faced with a loss, it's the idea of how the magnitude of how that loss affects you.
Yeah.
And so people don't really recognize that, right? They think, oh, the person has died, or I have lost this thing, or this relationship is no longer there, or I don't have that job anymore. But it's the bigger effect of it. So you have the primary loss, and then you have these secondary losses. And a lot of that you don't even realize until you actually continue to live on through life. Then you realize, oh my God, I don't have this person anymore to do X, Y, and Z with. Or I
Mm,
don't, you realize that my identity was very much connected to that job I lost. And now I don't know who I am, right? Or I was so
yeah.
wrapped up in my job, I didn't make sure to put in the work with some relationships, and now I don't have anybody to go back to. And so it's trying to really wrap your head around that fact that it is that one loss, but that one loss has this ripple effect onto so many other losses. And so
Mm,
for a lot of people, they're trying to understand how it all makes sense to who I am now. So grief changes you, right? Loss is
yes.
changing you. And people often think, well, I'm gonna get back to the person I used to be. And that's not the case, right?
Well,
Change happens through this. And so it's also trying to figure out, who am I now with this loss, right? And really trying to adapt it into your life.
yeah. What a pivotal question. Who am I now with this new experience and this new life that has now happened? And that's a really good point that you made, Jeelise. I don't think we sit with that enough, is that some of us try to, or the belief is that we need to find our way back to the person that we were before the loss happened, whether it's death, a relationship, whatever the job, whatever the experience is, but we're actually forever changed. And so now it's helping ourselves to understand who this person is now and kind of getting on with that new person and understanding how we heal that person. That's so well said. And is that something that you see the most in your work with people, helping them to understand or redefine who this new person is who's experienced this loss?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And it's also really normalizing the death process or the grief process as well, right? Because
Yeah.
we have this idea that grief either has these stages that we people talk about all the
These
time,
days.
that it's supposed to look a certain way, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all shaped by our history, our connections, our childhood, our religious affiliations, our
Yeah.
beliefs shape how we see the world. And so you have this term called the assumptive world, and usually that's kind of shattered by a loss, especially if it's something
Mm,
that is a complicated loss. So if there's how the person died, if it's
yeah.
a child that dies, or it just goes against the ideas of how we see and view the world. The idea
Wow.
that for example, a child usually doesn't die before their parents. We don't bury our children. And so it kind of, that's usually the thought process. Like, that's never going to happen. But every day, children die. And so that's usually not the framework that people kind of see the world through. And so when a loss happens, it shatters that assumptive world. And so a lot of the work is kind of building this new world. And in that new world, there's a new reality, a new person. And so it's a lot of, wow, I used to be this, but now you're not, right? And it doesn't mean that you'll never be that person again, but it looks different. Life looks a lot different now. And we have to give ourselves the grace to be able to figure it out. And just kind of live and experience new things and understand how the laws then is reconnected into your life. So
Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful. What, for the people who are listening and may be interested in actually beginning that journey in redefining or helping to make sense of what their new world looks like with this person, this thing no longer there, right? And all the sadness and pain they may be experiencing, what can someone who's seeking services expect when they come into session with you? What facilitating that journey, what does that look like? From amount of sessions, how you walk someone through that.
Right. So I guess start from the very beginning. You contact me, hey, I'm interested.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's that simple. It could be a
Yeah.
Instagram message, Facebook, pick up the phone, call me, email me, whatever.
Yes.
I always do a 15-minute consultation. And within that consultation, I'm trying to make sure that this is the right fit. We feel both comfortable working with each other, because that's important. If you don't feel like I am a safe person or a safe space for you, you're not going to open up, right, to
That's
me.
right.
And when the work isn't going to be as beneficial. And so confidentiality is a huge factor in all of this. And so I say that from the very beginning. I want to make sure that you and I are clear on how this is going to work. I'm not going to share anything outside of this space. I do seek clinical supervision so that my work remains ethical and safe, but that's always anonymous. I'm never using your names within that space. And just make sure that, because we are a small community, that I don't know who you are or who you're connected to, right? Because I don't want to bring any preconceived notions or biases within the work that is going to kind of derail or make it a bit murky. So no, my cousins can come and get support, but they could call me any other day and just have a chat with me, But yeah. So 15-minute consultation, I'm trying to understand where you're at, what your social support looks like, because that, like I said before, it's key in getting you through your grief journey, being able to have other people that you can kind of talk to about what's going on, that you can rely on if you need support in other ways. I want to know a bit more about the laws and how long ago it was, because that matters as well. If it's too early, sometimes the work isn't going to be very beneficial, because laws, you kind of need to experience it. You have to feel some of the emotions. And so if your person died a week ago, you haven't really really accepted the laws for itself yet, or really felt what the grief is. So I'm asking these types of questions. And sessions, I kind of ask people to commit to 6 sessions on a bi-weekly basis. There are three sessions in, we're going to kind of stop and review, is this working? What do we need? And maybe change it to a month and do more of a check-in type of thing. But it really just depends on the person. It's going to do an assessment at the first session. So I'm really looking at how resilient the person is, how occupied they are with the laws, what's the door pattern around it. And I'm always going to ask the story, pre-laws, what happened when you found out that the person had died? Were you, did you have to tell other people what type of laws it was? Because those things matter. In terms of how complicated the bereavement may be. So if someone has died by suicide or an overdose, or there's a accident, or there's some complication that's going to maybe prolong the experience, or there's some trauma around it, then we kind of
Yes.
have to address that first. So we have to deal with the trauma aspects before we can kind of get into the grief work.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be looking and asking for all of those things, trying to get your understanding around what grief means to you, what beliefs that you bring into the session. Uh,
Yes.
and yeah, so that's how it goes. Usually, if my client is inclined to homework, some people are very like, oh, I want to read everything. So I give
Yeah.
resources, maybe give you some books that you can follow up on. Just trying to get them to really understand what's to be expected. Like,
Mm.
I know that most workspaces give you 3 days, 7 days, but bereavement is way past that. And so just because you've packed up and you're done the funeral, it doesn't mean that it's not still impacting you. And so I'm looking at the health of the person as well, because
Yes.
it's important to know, are you still going to your GP? Have you had a physical recently? Because some of the physical symptoms that we experience with grief may be grief, but it also could be something else underlying. And so I want you
Mm.
to, make sure that you are in contact with your GP. If you're not sleeping well, if you aren't eating well. So there's basic things that we usually do to take care of yourself are very important in the grief journey. And so
Absolutely.
you have to get good rest. Why aren't you sleeping? So those are the types of things that I'm really focusing on in my first few sessions, and then we're getting into the laws and how it's impacting your life. Um,
Yes.
and really at the end, we want to make sure that we are uh, the all that acute grief. So that's at the very beginning. We kind of move it to the adaptation so that you have an integrated grief experience, so that the loss is now integrated into your life. So usually people kind of see this depiction of grief being this big ball, and your life then has to grow around it outside of the grief. So the grief is maybe not going to shrink. It may not, it's never going to disappear. There's no closure, but we want life to continue to grow around that grief. And so that's how we want it to integrate into your everyday. This becomes a part of you. There's a term called continuing bonds. And so we want to figure out, how does this laws then impact you? How do I carry it forward with me? Is it that I see my person as my guardian angel, or do I want to
Mm.
live a better life? Do I want to have better connections with people? Do I want to
Mm.
take better care of myself because the person died maybe from a health related issue? And so I want to make sure that I'm now taking care of myself better. So how is this laws? How do you make meaning of it? And that's how we
Yes.
kind of integrate it into your life. So I hope that
Love
answers.
that.
Yeah.
No, that was thorough. And I was just thinking, you really do take a comprehensive assessment in the initial session with your clients,
Mhm.
looking at all parts of it: trauma, health. If you've seen a GP, are you sleeping? Because physical health is mental health, guys. And
Mhm.
sometimes that inflamed state that we're in could be a combination of other health issues that are unaddressed, leading to the triggers in our mental health. That is lovely, Jeelise. Thank you for that. So Our Lady takes a thorough approach in working with her clients. And we'll get to how people can reach out to you specifically towards the end. So kind of pivoting a bit, Jeelise, one thing that I'm also always fascinated about is how different cultures assign different meanings to grief. And you touched on this a little bit about how does someone make sense of it? What's their understanding of when someone transitions or when they have lost something that's significant in their lives? So what is how do you remain culturally sensitive in your work with folks? Because we have a lot of different cultures within Bermuda as well, right?
Yeah. So I mean, people can call me an expert at grief or whatever,
Uh-huh.
but I don't necessarily use that word, right? I feel like
Okay, noted.
each individual is an expert at their own grief experience, and
Yes.
my role
Yeah.
is to kind of help you bring out that, right? And
Mm,
so I'm learning from you as much as you're learning from me. So I want to make sure that my work is person centered. And so that means I ask the questions. I can't even just assume that I'm Bermudian and I know this is how we do things, right? With the funeral, it's usually a funeral. People have a wake, Not everybody does that,
That's
right?
right.
Not everybody has the same meaning towards those things. And so you are going to teach me about how you see the world. And so culturally, I'm gonna ask those questions. Well, how do you see that, right? How do you identify with certain beliefs and things like that? Because if you take like in New Orleans, they do a funeral line procession, and
Mm-hmm.
so they kind of it's a joyous occasion, right?
Mm-hmm.
That may not be how the person kind of sees the grief. They may not have wanted that, but family did. So that kind of complicates the process for them,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe they weren't allowed to have that and they really wanted to, right? And so I can't just assume that you're going to celebrate it in the way that that culture does. So I'm going
That's
to
right.
ask the question, right? How do you see it? Is that important to you? Because a big example I always use is that people visiting the gravesite of the person means nothing to me personally. I
Mm.
don't usually go back and sit or put flowers or remember. That means nothing to me, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that that's right or wrong. But for you as my client, it may mean everything. I go there every Friday. I tell my partner about my day. I always make sure that the grave is clean and pristine, and I put the flowers there every holiday. And that might be what you need at that time. So I'm going to always be asking the questions and getting the feedback around the fact that, not everybody sees the practices the same way. And that I can't just paint one brush. Grief is a very individual process. And so I have to make sure that I bring that to my clients every time so that I'm learning that person and how they see the world. So that's how I kind of keep it.
You have to assume that the person is the expert in their experience, right? And
Yes.
that's how we stay client centered. Even though we come with all our textbook knowledge and our own lived experience as well. I love that. That is putting the person in the center of the treatment process in your practice with them. Lovely. So one thing that my work has taught me is that someone can lose something or someone 10 years ago and still be having that same emotional reaction as though, or experience as though it happened yesterday or it's happening in real time, like you and I sitting here. So can you shed some light on what's happening to someone when they're having this prolonged grief experience? What does that mean?
Okay. So just because they may still have a lot of strong emotional feelings around
Yeah.
the laws 10, 20 years from now, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a prolonged grief response. Prolonged grief is now classified in the DSM, Diagnostic Certificate Manual,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we people in the field kind of use
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
diagnose certain conditions. And so it is it's a set prescription of experiences, and
Yeah.
so 10%
Mm-hmm.
of clients of grievers can experience this prolonged grief response. It's also
Okay.
known as complicated grief or chronic grief.
Okay.
And so with that, the key points of that is that the person is still very much yearning and pining for that loved one. And so the
Mm.
thoughts of that loved one, it kind of is intrusive into their everyday lived experiences. So
Wow.
if a year from now, so the death happened today, and a year from now, that person is still struggling in the way that they cannot get up out of bed,
Mm.
that their everyday is kind of, the mundane task of cleaning, personal hygiene, cooking, eating, going to work. If that is being impeded on because of your laws, then that is a prolonged grief response. It's different from depression or PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder,
Uh-huh.
because it
Uh-huh.
has to have that piece of a person who is really longing that and yearning for that deceased person. It's just not I'm sad or I've
Yes.
had a traumatic experience, because usually trauma is a time specific
Yes.
scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so grief is long lasting, right? It's a
Yes.
lifetime that you can experience it, but it's really this idea that I am consumed by my grief or the
Yes.
person or the thing that I have lost. And so if I'm still affected 10 years from now, every year on the death anniversary, but I'm still living a very healthy life, I'm still going on, then that's a little bit different than this prolonged grief response. It's that I am fully consumed in my grief, that everything I do, I'm still connecting it to that person in a very unhealthy way. Then that's
Yes.
when you need to get some additional support. But if 10 years from now, I'm still remembering my loved one, I can still, remember the day I was told that they died, or that I, celebrate them in some way, then that's very different, because you're still living life, but it's
Yes.
integrating that life into your life, right? It's integrating the
Yes.
laws into your life. And so that's also doing the term of continuing bonds, right? I'm continuing to have a relationship with my person even though they aren't physically here anymore, because
That's
the
right.
love doesn't disappear. And so you're going to still carry them with you. They still live within you, through the memories, through your genetic makeup, your legacy,
Yes.
all of that. So they are a part of you. And some losses are too great that you can forget, right? And so, and for a lot of people, why would you want to forget, right?
Right.
Because that's
Right.
erasing a huge part of who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's something that we often kind of shy away from too. It's
Yeah.
remembering and letting people remember their loved one. We kind of want to forget, and that's
Yeah.
it's not okay. We need to
Yeah.
let people talk about their loved ones, express them, share stories. It's not going, they know that the person has died. It's not going to
Yeah.
make them any sadder to bring that person up. They probably want to talk about them.
Yes.
So, yeah.
That is such a good point. So you said that there are ways that we can honor this person that is no longer with us by integrating the grief into our lives through continuing bonds, right? I
Yeah.
love that term, continuing bonds. Got to come back to that. And that was actually kind of my next question for you, because some of us actually struggle to feel our way through it, to create these continuing bonds and how we honor these people that are no longer with us. How does someone know that they are consumed with the grief but not addressing the grief? Does that make sense?
Yes, in that so you have a dual process model when it comes to
Yeah.
grief, right? And so you have loss orientation and restoration orientation. And what we want to see in a healthy grief experience is that you're able to oscillate between the two. So if someone is
Mm,
all loss, I'm crying every day, all day, I can't sleep, think, do anything else, I am pretty much consumed with the loss of this, and they're not able to see the I want to say the benefits, but that there is some joy that comes with having this experience, right? There is growth that comes through this process as well. And so if they aren't able to see a life beyond this laws and what's
yeah.
happening right now, if they aren't able to kind of move on with the day, have set new goals and dreams and kind of work towards them, if
Hmm.
they're not able to go between either one, then that's unhealthy. So if I'm just loss orientated, where I'm just consumed with the person, with the death, how they died, if it's a murder and they're only worrying about trying to get justice, and they're consumed with that, but they aren't looking at, well, if there's other children around and they aren't, making sure that they are taken care of, or if it's a spouse still in the house,
Mm,
and you aren't, cultivating those relationships still, you're not back to work, you're not doing all of those things. If you're not going between both, then it's unhealthy. And
yes.
also with growth too, is that we kind of pour ourselves into just the future as well. So it may be just work. Work, 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 work. I want
Oh.
to be healthy. My
Oh.
person may have died of cancer. I am
Mm-hmm.
exercising every day and you
Mm-hmm.
didn't even walk up the steps before, like that. It's gotta have a balance.
Yes.
Life has to have
Yes.
balance, and even within our grief process, there has to be a balance. So that oscillation between loss orientation and grief orientation is important in a healthy grief experience response. So if I'm all loss, then that's unhealthy. If I'm all growth, looking towards the future, nothing stops me, that's not healthy either. We have to be able to adapt the laws into our lives, integrate it into who we are.
Mm.
It doesn't have to become our complete story, but it's a chapter in our book. And so we kind
Wow.
of have to navigate that.
I am learning so much. It's oscillation. It's kind of a dance in this, it sounds
Yes,
like. You go in between, back and forth, and we can't also think we're healing when we're just future oriented. We're just doing. We're
yes,
just doing, right?
yeah,
So we've convinced ourselves that, oh, I'm healing because I'm doing. But a
right.
part of the healing is feeling and sitting within as well.
Mm-hmm.
That is excellent. That's good. Okay. So I'm conscious of the time, and I want to kind of begin to bring us to a community question to see if I have any. But the last question that I want to kind of ask specifically on this in our topic is, how can we get the community to, how can we, because I don't like how I worded this question. So maybe I'll switch it around a bit. But how can we learn as a community to support someone in their grief and how they're grieving without disenfranchising this person? Because you said something that's very important, that after the funeral and the service, people kind of just get on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or after you've experienced a big life loss, a job, a relationship, or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
People just kind of get on and life continues, right? And we know this, but how do we ensure that we are supporting this person through their phases and their stages? You said that grief is long lasting. We just kind of learn to integrate life without this person or this thing not there anymore. How
Mm-hmm.
can we do that in a way that feels right for the person?
So it's a matter of just asking the person, how
Yeah,
can I show up for you? What do you need from me? Because a lot of times we get caught up on, I don't know what to say. So you kind of
yeah,
ice the person out. I
yeah,
just don't know. I don't know. This is too big for me to handle. But it's, the person may not know what they need as well, but it's just showing up and being there for them, right?
yeah,
It's a matter of being able to sit in the uncomfortable periods as well. So we don't want to do the toxic positivity where it's like all silver linings. We have to we have to be grateful for the time we had with them. No, no, no,
yeah.
no, because I want more time, right? The person
Right,
grieving is like, but I
right.
want more time. And this wasn't the opportune time for them to go because I needed them to do X, Y, and Z. So saying something like that isn't helpful,
No,
right? But it
no.
is a matter of acknowledging that the loss has actually happened. So we don't want to
Yes,
shy away from it. And with that acknowledgement, a lot of it is kind of sitting with our own mortality, right? And our own uncomfortability around grief and loss and death and dying. If we can
mm,
address that with ourselves first, what makes us uncomfortable, why it's uncomfortable to us, then we're better equipped to be able to help somebody else because you can understand better. You can have more empathy. If you
yes.
understand why it may be difficult for you, you can hopefully understand a little bit better why it will be difficult for somebody else. But don't isolate people. Do more than say. So if it's that your person needs groceries, I'm calling you to pick you up. So what time you want to be ready? Because I'm gonna take you Linda's today. Not call
Yeah,
me if you need me
yeah,
because they're not gonna call, right? Most people don't want to burden people after the funeral. Everybody goes back to their lives and they're thinking nobody's
yes.
worrying about me. I should also be moving on with this too. And that's not how it works, really and truly. It's like I said, there's no closure. There aren't any stages. I may be okay today, but Tuesday, I'm a complete mess.
That's
You know,
right.
so just acknowledge that the loss is real. It's happened, and ask that person, "How can I support you? What is it that you need? do I just need to sit here and come by, or do you
Mm,
need me to take you somewhere or do something? Really do rather than say. You can't say anything because you can't bring the person back. You can't
yes,
give them back what they really want most. So just
yes,
show up and just be able to be uncomfortable with all of it, like comfortable with all the bad parts, the good parts. Yeah. And if you know you can't, then you can. Send a
yeah,
text message. Hey, I see this support group. I'll drop you off and pick you up if
that's
that's all
right.
you can do, right? Know your own
That's
capacity.
right. That is such a good point. I also think that showing up and just being present, people don't mind when you keep it real, right? People
Mhm.
don't mind you being authentic, babe. I don't know what to say. I can't imagine what you're experiencing, but I just want to be here with you. I just want to be here with you. If you want to kick me out, that's fine too. But I
Mhm.
just I just want to sit with you. And people will appreciate that realness more than anything, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right. People aren't gonna reach out. They're all don't say, "Oh, call if you need me." They're
Yeah.
not gonna do that.
They're
Such a good
not.
point.
They're
I
probably not
I
even
don't
remember either.
right, right, because
Yeah.
that's what stress and grief does, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
I don't see any questions posed from the community or any comments from the YouTube live. So I will go ahead and just ask one more question from what I had sent you, Jeelise. And um, that is um, so we already talked about how loved ones can support someone grieving. And we touched on this briefly, but I guess we can end with this. Loss occurs throughout our life cycle, right? And it's not just through death. Death is just one way that we as humans experience that. I think we established that from the beginning.
Mhm.
So, um, can you give some examples of other experiences where we as humans experience loss, but we may not identify it as a loss or grief experience, even if someone hasn't died?
Right.
Yeah.
So friendships that kind of
Yes.
break up, the
Yes.
person, for whatever reason, you just not, the relationship is not how it used to be, right? Doesn't mean that something bad has to happen and it has to be this traumatic or dramatic experience, but just it's not the same. Life happens, we have different responsibilities, especially as an
Mhm.
adult. Or then we become parents. Parenthood is a big one, right? Children are a blessing, but I also miss my old life, of not having to worry about somebody else's their life 24/7. I am responsible for a little human being,
That's
and I
right.
used to just be responsible for me, you
And it
know.
doesn't.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, becoming a parent is a huge transition, which comes with
Yes.
a lot of losses. Um,
Wow.
Even
Never thought
success,
of that.
right? Becoming an entrepreneur. For most of us, we want that. We want to have the freedom of, creating our own schedules, being off when we like. But it's also a very lonely and isolating
Ooh.
space. And people don't understand how you're gonna be on this 24/7, or it's not gonna
Mm.
work if you're,
Yep.
you know. And so it's a learning experience. As great as it
Yes.
is, it's also quite isolated. And so there's some losses that come with that.
Yeah.
Retirement, great, we got to that age, we think we have the time to do all the things we didn't get to do when we were working.
Hmm.
But like I said before, a lot of people's identity is kind of wrapped up in that title that they held
That's
within their
right.
position.
Ooh.
They lose a whole circle of
That is
people
so
that they
true.
see and interact with on a day-to-day basis. And then you're
Mm.
home and it's like, oh, wow, I've got to figure out what to do every day now. It looks a
Wow.
lot differently. You have relocation. So when children are going over to school and university, again, it's great, right? But it's also very different, and there's losses that come with that. My friends are not the same. I may not get the same type of friends when I go there. Having to learn a whole new place, my family, like there's a lot of things that you kind of have to transition to. And so, as great as it is with the new opportunities, I'm also feeling like, I'm a little sad about this too.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
could be grief that's showing up, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So those are some things that,
That is, someone just commented, Ty said, two things can be true. Ooh, the many paradoxes of life.
yes. Hmm.
Yes. And these transitions kind of reshape our identity and how we make sense of our new lives. And would it be important for us, Jeelise, just like how we're supposed to normalize grief and, this new life that grief brings, to normalize these new transitions in life of losses in parenthood, friendships, breakups, retirement, jobs, right? Success, entrepreneurship. How do we go about those things the same way we would as like a grieving period?
Yes, because it's
Okay.
it's being able to sit with the feelings. So I have three things I always say. You want to feel all of your feelings.
Yes.
Yes. You want to be able to assess your support system. So that's, we have great people, and then sometimes we don't have great people. And so
Yeah.
it's looking to see who are my actual people that can show up for me in these periods of
Mm-hmm.
my life, and finding support outside. So it may be a support group, it may be a therapist, it may be a church family, but
Mm.
there's always somebody around that can be of help to you. So assess that, and then using great coping skills. And I think we're all we know what these are. It's
Yeah.
the exercise, it's the journaling, prayer, meditation, psalm baths. It's all of those things that I think we got a good handle on now, but we have to use them when we are going through these transitions.
Can you say those three things again? Feel your feelings.
Feel all of your feelings.
Feel all of your feelings.
Yes. Assess your support systems, and
Assess your
then
support.
use your coping skills, healthy
Use your
coping
coping
skills.
skills. That is something we're going to double back to. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Jeelise Allen, thanatologist, founder of Tuwile Grief Support Practice. And how can the folks find you, Miss Jeelise, if they're interested in getting started with working with you and their grieving journey?
Okay, so you can follow me on Instagram at Tuwile BDA. So that's
Mm-hmm.
TUWILE
Mm-hmm.
BDA. You can
Mm-hmm.
email info@tuwilebda.com. My website is also tuwilebda.com. Or call me 591-1107.
And 591 1107.
1107.
And I'm gonna put that on there. Hopefully the folks can see that at the bottom there. Miss Jeelise, thank you so much. I would just want to take a moment to give you your flowers, lady. Thank you for the work that you do in this community. Thank you for the space that you've created. Thank you for holding space for people, us regularly. Guys, you see her, but she is out in the community, outside of her own practice with Mayvera, with the Women's Resource Center. You host a group, a women's grief
Yes.
group
Yep. So we meet
weekly.
the last Wednesday of every month. So
Okay,
this week, Wednesday coming up, March 26th, from 6 to 7:30. You don't have to register. It's free of charge. It's open to all women.
that's right. So thank you so much for joining us, guys. I hope you were able to grab something from this amazing live. Again, Jeelise, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so honored. My night sister, my sister in entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
sorting this community out, the community that we love so much, and creating healing spaces for our people. And happy Sunday, guys. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. And you will be able to catch a replay of this live on our YouTube channel. So please go ahead and subscribe. Okay, see you guys later. Bye.
Thank you.